Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube by searching Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. We got a great show for you guys today. Penguins had a couple roster moves. That's how we'll kick things off. But also, Sidney Crosby, Erik Karlsson, Rickard Rakell, Kyle Dubas, Mike Sullivan. A lot of the Penguins contingent are up in Montreal getting set for the Four Nations face-off, but all eyes are on Sidney Crosby as that tournament is just 2 days away. We'll provide an injury update on Crosby and whether or not he will be available for Team Canada's opener against Team Sweden on Wednesday evening. Then we'll close things out, as we do every single Monday, with our Pittsburgh Penguins Power Rankings. But let's kick it off with a couple of roster moves that the Pens made over the weekend. First and foremost, terminating the contract of forward Jesse Puljujärvi. If you've tuned into this show long enough, you know that we have been advocating for Puljujärvi to get more opportunities with the Penguins. He was brought in the middle of last season after losing some time due to a double hip resurfacing surgery. He played last year. You could tell that he was still lagging a little bit. He still wasn't quite up to 100%. And then he comes back after the offseason, a full offseason of health, and he looked really good. He was one of the Penguins' best players in the preseason, leading them in scoring, and got that opportunity right out the gate on the Penguins' third line. And since then, those opportunities have become lesser and lesser and lesser. It just feels like Jesse Puljujärvi never fully gained the trust of head coach Mike Sullivan. Because of that, he was pushed out of the lineup for other guys like a Phil Tomasino, who came in here midseason, guys like a Cody Glass. And if you look into the future, it seems as if that trend was just going to continue for Jesse Puljujärvi. New guys are getting opportunities, or at the very least, proving that they deserve opportunities, especially when you look post-trade deadline. The Penguins are only going to have a handful of call-ups that they can make, but you have players like Vasily Ponomarev, who played on Saturday against Philly, that deserve opportunities. You have players like Ville Koivunen, who deserve opportunities. You have players potentially like Rutger McGroarty that deserve opportunities. And I think the writing was on the wall that those players would have been given chances over a guy like Jesse Puljujärvi, which is why this ended up happening. Now, I say they terminated his contract. He was placed on waivers for purpose of termination. That was the exact phrasing used. That's exactly what they did. That has to be come to that decision has to be came to mutually by the Penguins and by Jesse Puljujärvi. So Puljujärvi saw the writing on the wall, said, I'm not going to get another opportunity here, chooses to leave money on the table for the remainder of the season to get out of his contract and potentially become a free agent, might go somewhere else in the NHL, but more than likely heads back over to Europe. Again, this is just a simple case of the opportunity was no longer there for Jesse Puljujärvi. In 48 games played with the Penguins between last year and this, 13 points, 6 goals, 7 assists. Never played poorly in my eyes, but just couldn't put all the pieces together, and certainly not enough as a 200-foot player to allow him to be in the good graces of head coach Mike Sullivan. So wishing all the best for Jesse Puljujärvi. In response, they had one open contract slot in the organization under that 50-man roster, or that 50-man contract situation. They utilized that less than a day later to claim left-handed defenseman Vladislav Kolyachonok of the Utah Hockey Club. And it's a similar situation to Jesse Puljujärvi. Not entirely, but similar in the way that the opportunity just ran out with the Utah Hockey Club. Utah has been dealing with a lot of injuries on the blue line all season long, and because of that, Kolyachonok got the opportunity to come in, play, ended up with 23 games played this season, but some of those players are starting to get healthy. John Marino's back in the lineup. Sean Durzi is getting close to coming back in the lineup, hence Kolyachonok being placed on waivers by the Utah Hockey Club. Penguins swoop in, pick up another 23-year-old that kind of fits the mold of what we've been seeing. Guys that we already talked about in this episode. Cody Glass, Phil Tomasino, young guys that have either fallen out of favor or fallen onto the market with their current teams, and yet they feel like they have a little bit more to give. He comes over to the Penguins, only 23 years old, brings some decent size with him. He's 6'2", $195, good skater, good offensive instincts, somebody who historically had been expected to be able to be a good penalty killer at the National Hockey League level, but he hasn't had many opportunities in Utah on the man disadvantage. Only about 3 minutes of PK time this year for Kolyachonok. So we'll see what he's able to do with the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's under contract through the next season at $775,000. And if you look at the Penguins Puckpedia page right now, 8 defensemen on the NHL roster. What does that mean for a guy like Ryan Shea? What does that mean for a guy like Matt Grzelcyk, who a lot of people are starting to talk about in trade rumors? We'll see what happens when the Penguins return from the Four Nations face-off. But Vladislav Kolyachonok joining the Pittsburgh Penguins when they do return to the city of Pittsburgh. Speaking of that Four Nations face-off break, that's where we're going to turn our attention, because that's where the hockey world is all going to be looking at over the next 2 weeks, especially Pittsburgh Penguins captain Sidney Crosby. Like I mentioned, everybody's up in Montreal right now preparing for that Four Nations face-off that begins on Wednesday. The question was, would the captain of Canada be good to go? Well, he answered that this week. After missing this past week due to an upper body injury, Sidney Crosby joined Team Canada at practice, including Mark Stone and Nathan MacKinnon, who it seems like he's going to be playing on a line with, and saying afterwards he's, quote, good to go, and that he will play on Wednesday. That is huge news for Team Canada, huge news for the Pittsburgh Penguins, who will need Crosby once he returns from this Four Nations face-off tournament. But nice to see Crosby get back in there after being injured last Tuesday and missing both Friday and Saturday's game. He'll be leading Team Canada on Wednesday against Team Sweden in the Four Nations face-off opener. Now, this is huge for Canada for multiple reasons. One, he's one of the best players in the sport, so having him available is always good, but also because this tournament is kind of a get-right spot for Team Canada. No medals in the last 2 World Juniors. They didn't medal at World Championships in 2024 in Czechia. They need to get back on track. Getting Sidney Crosby, especially captain Sidney Crosby, back in the ranks usually bodes well for Team Canada. Shout out to the Sidney Crosby archives on Twitter, because every time Crosby suits up as captain, he wins. Undefeated as captain of Team Canada. Again, shout out to Sidney Crosby archives for that nugget. This is the first best-on-best action for Crosby since 2016. And what did he do then? That was the World Cup of Hockey. Oh, he just put up 10 points, 3 goals, 7 assists in 6 games played. Canada came away with gold, and Sidney Crosby came away with the tournament MVP. So Sid, good to go. We'll be excited to see him with the Nova Scotia brother Nathan MacKinnon on Team Canada's second line on Wednesday against Rickard Rakell and Erik Karlsson of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's finish things off with our Pittsburgh Penguins Power Rankings for Week 18. Not a lot of movement in this one because there wasn't a lot of games played between last week and this week. We had 3 games that were very weird because of injuries, who was in the lineup, who got taken out of the lineup. Shoot, on Saturday, Crosby, Malkin, and Brian Rust all missed the game. So not a lot of movement in that time, but I will say there was a little bit that did move. Erik Karlsson drops from number 4 to number 5 on my Pittsburgh Penguins Power Rankings. He's continuing his hot stretch, and this has a lot to do with the guy that's taking his place at number 4, more so than it does his play individually. Karlsson has points in 5 straight games, which is 6 points, 2 goals, 4 assists, and a gorgeous goal in Philadelphia that got them tied in the second period. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get the job done, but not for lack of trying from 65. Erik Karlsson has been very good over the last handful of weeks, and he continues to be in my top 5 for the Pittsburgh Penguins. At number 4, up 1 spot from last week's power rankings, goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic. He has been, again, excellent is not a strong enough word for what we've seen from Alex Nedeljkovic over the last handful of weeks. 5-2-1 record, .934 save percentage, and a 1.86 goals against average. This, over the 3-week span that he's had here, has been the most reliable and consistent goaltending that we have seen in a half-decent sample size in a very long time in the city of Pittsburgh. Last year, even when Nedeljkovic was running things at the end of the season, and they went 8-3-3, he had a sub-900 save percentage. He was doing just enough for the Penguins to get wins night in and night out. He's doing way more than that right now. And then if you go back further than that, Tristan Jarry has been inconsistent for the last handful of years. Before that, Casey DeSmith is somebody who I dubbed coin flip Casey because you never knew what you were going to get with Casey DeSmith. Was he going to be really good Casey, or was he going to be really bad Casey? So there hasn't been a lot of reliable and consistent goaltending for the Pittsburgh Penguins over the last couple seasons, but the last 3 weeks, Alex Nedeljkovic has given just that. Like I mentioned, a over 930 save percentage, and he's won 5 of his last 8 starts. The only off night I'll say in that time was Anaheim. His loss to Anaheim, where he gave up 4 goals, but even that wasn't really on him. The Penguins were just outplayed by the Anaheim Ducks in that game. He didn't have a great night, but neither did anybody in front of him. So again, hard to put that one on him. But outside of that, has been extremely, extremely good for the Pittsburgh Penguins over the last handful of weeks. 3-1, I'm not going to change it. I'm just not. The last game Brian Rust played, he had 2 assists without Sidney Crosby. Rickard Rakell has been very good just all season long, so he's going to stay at number 2. And how am I going to take Sidney Crosby out of the number 1 slot just because he got injured and missed the last 2 games? No, that line has been extremely good for the Penguins, and you could honestly make the argument that these 3 could go in any which order. The way I'm going to run it is Brian Rust at number 3, Rickard Rakell at number 2 for the time being, and Sidney Crosby still sits atop the Pittsburgh Penguins power rankings. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Iceberg. We'll have a much longer, full-length episode tomorrow where we'll dive into the new acquisition for the Penguins in Kolyachonok. We'll talk a little bit more about the Four Nations face-off that starts on Wednesday, and we will give our quarter-century teams, me and Nick Horwat, for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But that's going to do it for this one. Again, remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.